Hi, my name is Hannah.
And I'm Devon.
And we are The Danger in Silence. And we're here today with a Halloween episode. Because it's a spooky time.
You might remember us from last year. We did the Halloween episode last year as well. Mm-hmm. And that was, we talked a lot about how people watch horror movies for different reasons or are scared of horror movies, and how we had such two different opinions on it. Horror movies make my anxiety worse and make me more scared, and how horror movies Hannah enjoys and help her through that instead.
Yeah, so we thought this year we would delve into that a little bit more, because if you might recall from our real devoted listeners, that was reflected very much so in our childhoods, and what we found traumatic as a child, maybe we didn't want to enjoy as an adult. Whereas if we had a really safe, wonderful experience with scary, spooky things as a child, it was much easier to enjoy those as an adult. So we thought, what is recreational fear and experiencing fear as a child? What is that concept? What do we know about it? And how do we interact with it? Now, there are some... You will hear, the first thing that I did when looking up information for this is finding a great article from a local news station, not local to us. I think it's in Texas, so you'll see it in the show notes. That was entitled, "Experts Say Early Exposure to Horror Movies is Potentially Traumatic to Children." So the type of scares that we're talking here are age appropriate and not something that is going to traumatize. We are definitely not saying there should be all ages screenings of Dario Argento at every local theater. We are very we want to see things that maybe a child who's interested in exploring fear and what it's like to be afraid could dive into without having, the horror of watching a really scary movie with your friends when you don't feel like that's a safe situation. That's not the kind of fear we're talking about. We're talking about safe fear and where that kind of plays out. So that might mean maybe a 3-year-old isn't super interested in fear in that way, but maybe they do like being spooked, reading Grew Over, there's a monster at the end of this book. They're into some experiments with fear. And that's a really healthy and normal thing. We want to experience fear in a safe place before we experience it in the real world in a scary or traumatic place. Because, the world today there's a lot of things that you can be exposed to in school, on the news, in your own neighborhood, that can be really overwhelming for kiddos. And so safe fear offers a place for them to understand what their fear response is, understand that anxiety and how they cope with fear while still knowing that nothing truly bad is going to happen.
As a mom, it's something that's very interesting to navigate. And one thing I was thinking of when you were saying that is something else that we had researched is about how children being exposed to scary stuff younger, and then they're seeing the way that they gets resolved. So that way they're seeing the scary stuff, and then they're seeing that, the good guy always does win in these situations. And just thinking about that with kids shows that are age appropriate for 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, even 3-year-olds is they'll have a show and maybe there's a ghost who is haunting a house and everyone's freaking out. And then they find out that the ghost is actually just a cat in the rafters or something like that. So showing there that maybe for a little bit they are scared and they're worried that there's a ghost. And then at the end they realize, oh, it's not actually a ghost. That wasn't what that was. It was just a noise that they heard, and it ended up having a reasonable explanation. And I think that can be really helpful for children just to see that, maybe they're afraid of something, but there actually is a logical explanation, and there's something that it's not necessarily a real thing that they're afraid of. And so it helps them experience. And I've seen that through being a mom of, my son being afraid of something and then thinking back to a TV show or something. And when he saw that that wasn't actually what it really was, it made him question how he thought something was. Ghosts are a prime example of things that he's seen in shows and realizing that, oh, maybe it's just a noise I'm hearing. Maybe it's not actually a ghost haunting the house.
Yeah, I think this also really makes me think of other parents, like stories about not really knowing what is going to have an impact on your child. Like, children are their own individual selves, and they're going to have different reactions. I mean, it reminds me of this really lovely anecdote from Patton Oswalt, the comedian, who talked about how in one day his daughter was watching a cute video about like learning about the bones in the body. And it was like talking about what a skeleton is that was made for children. And then later on in the day, they turned on the TV and it had been on a station where they were showing a horror movie where it was a transformation of a man into a werewolf. And it was very gory and really traumatic. That night, she couldn't sleep because she was so scared that her skeleton was going to come out of her body through her mouth and dance.
Yeah.
And she was really afraid of that. And then, but like when he asked about the werewolf, she was just like, doggy. And I think that's like a wonderful illustration for the children in my life. Like that I don't have any children, but whenever I get to chill out with them, like there are things that at Halloween you're like, oh yeah, they love the big scary werewolf. They're okay with the headless horseman, but the little head that's just like on a cape, like that is like, I got talking to from my neighbor who was like, it's a little bit too scary. And I was like, oh, yeah, it's interesting. I think there was one mother who was talking about like it can be a great gift to push your child to their limits a little bit because you might see that they're much more able like to cope and understand like fictional fear than you thought. And I thought that was cool. And I would love to hear your, as an actual human mother, your thoughts on that too.
I mean, to be fair, I feel like you have more kids in your life than I do. So, so I was kind of thinking about the first point you made about how the way children are afraid of things and how things that we might find scary, they don't find scary, or how we assume that they're going to find scary, we don't. So my son's really into Doctor Who right now. And in that, a lot of the episodes are psychologically scary. And so a lot of it's just stuff that messes with your mind. And to me, it's really creepy a way some of them are. And to him, they're just boring episodes because he doesn't understand the context. He doesn't understand. He's not afraid of that stuff yet because he doesn't understand it, but he's also never had experience with watching things in that context. So that's one thing that I found. There was an episode that really freaked me out, and he just thought it was a boring episode because he had no idea what was going on. And with that, the children understand fictional fear. And again, with Doctor Who, because that's all we watch right now, is a lot of the times I'll be like, are you okay? Checking in with him, and he goes, Mom, it's fake. Like, that's just someone in a costume. And actually, that is something I've done when there are some parts that are creepy. I can see that he's scared, and I'll go, I wonder what it's like to wear that costume. Like, it must be really hot in there. Or if something like creepy happens, I'll be like, I wonder how they filmed that. Like, it's so interesting how they made it look so realistic, and really trying to make him realize in those moments that it is fake. In some cases, it's okay for them to be, in my situation with my son, it's okay for him to be afraid. And I think a lot of it's just knowing your child, of knowing like what's him just being, or what's your child just being a normal, healthy amount of being afraid. And when is it that you just need to break the moment. And then when it was you need to turn it off. So it's just really good to see. But I found that, or putting some humor in it, I found can sometimes help lighten the mood. So he's still getting that exposure to having those bits of fear, but he's able to take himself out and realize that it's not real, which I think helps, in real life too, to be able to break that with humor. And one thing as we were talking about before, how, horror isn't the same, or like scary stuff isn't the same as gore. It's not in this situation, we're not talking about gore and violence. And that's one reason, that we watch Doctor Who and shows like that, is there's a lot of really scary characters, and there's some scary storylines, but there's never any violence. They don't show blood, they don't show violence. So finding some stuff like that has those scary moments, but not the really freaky parts. And I think that helps kids separate and make it realize that it's fiction, is because they're not. I think if they saw horror and gory and bloody, then it would be a lot harder to be able to tell fiction from fact.
Yeah, and I think that there are, we found one article that I loved, not just because it talks about Aarhus University's recreational fear lab, which we talked about in depth last year. But also I really liked this idea of there are children, and I think we see them more now. I know there were kids when I was growing up who were obsessed with the Chucky movies.
Yes.
And like very into them. And I liked scary things, but I liked, the things that I found traumatic were not the scary things. It was always like, oh God. Like I think the most traumatic movie I saw growing up was The Little Mermaid. The scene where she says goodbye to her father was like deeply traumatic. And I would sob every time, and my siblings would pause the movie and rewind it and then call me back in and be like, it's okay, it's okay. And then I would sit down, and then they play it again. So yeah, I'm calling out an LCSW now for doing that to her 5-year-old sister. But like, there are different things that kids react to because of their own interactions with the world, right? And now we definitely see these kiddos, and I really enjoy, there's such a funny dissonance between seeing like a 6-year-old and then like wearing a Michael Myers mask. Like, I'm sorry, that really cracks me up.
Yeah.
And I think doing some research into that was really interesting. Like, okay, they might like the spooky things, but their parents only let them watch like the few clips. Or there are movies that they enjoy that maybe other kiddos their age, they're not showing them to other kiddos. Mm-hmm. But there are kids that love horror, and especially with their experiences around fear, might have a more fascination with horror. And that can be really healthy and normal. So having a preoccupation with something that they find frightening can help them understand where that fear is coming from and kind of learn how to conquer it. It can also be like a badge of bravery. If they hear their big sister, big brother saying like, that was a really scary movie. And then they're like, if I can sit through that, all the kids my age are going to know how tough and brave I am. And it is kind of an interesting way that kids interact with each other where, I mean, now I talk about things I'm afraid of all the time. But when I was little, you know, it would be like, no, I watched The Ring.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that was, and like everyone was like, oh my gosh, you sat through The Ring. And be like, I didn't pause it once.
Like, I watched it 8 times. That was our, absolutely. In middle school, we watched it outside in a tent. And that was.
Oh, yeah. It's so cool.
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to go show just kidding. I'm not going to go show my 6-year-old that. But that just really made me think about a couple of points there. And one of them is also the difference, I think, with kids now, too, is that a lot of them have access to YouTube and different things, not just horror movies. And I feel like just thinking about talking to friends on the playground about things and, you know, having a conversation about what to not share with friends necessarily, and it's okay for you to watch it, but other people might be scared. I've had my son come home from school and say, you can't call this phone number. It's a cursed number. If you call it, they're going to come and kill you, and really freaked out about it. And he found out his friend on the playground saw it on YouTube. And so it's interesting to see there's a difference between a child being scared from a movie or a show, and they can kind of separate that fact from fiction. But nowadays there's YouTube. And, try to monitor what my child does. And, but, they're hearing from friends and stuff. And there's this fear of, no, but it's on YouTube. It's real, because they think we work very hard on explaining that's not true. But still, I think that at 6 years old, it's so hard to see. Where in a movie and TV show, it's much easier to say, okay, this isn't real. But to have that difference. And so that was a big thing that I've noticed. And then another point that I just thought of while you were talking was how I did read an article how about they were talking, and I can find it to link it, but they were talking about some children will watch horror and then they'll identify with the villain. And a parent might freak out and think something's wrong with their child. But if they sit down and talk to their child, they'll see the feelings that are, there's feelings that they need to process and feelings they need to work through. And it's just not something to worry about, not something to freak out about, but something to just sit and talk to them and why they feel that way. So I think checking in with your child, especially if they really enjoy scarier stuff, just to see why they like it. And there's nothing wrong with them liking it, but it's just a good thing to just, get curious. It's always good to ask your kid questions and find out why they like things. But it's just good to get curious and see if there's anything that they want to talk about. Or after seeing a movie or a show, if there's any questions that they might have. So just having that open dialogue and conversation and not freaking out about things and just accept it, being neutral about what they say and really listening to how they feel.
Yeah. And I really liked in this one article, which had some very interesting people. So there's a former president of the APA was talking about the relationship between child horror buffs and adult horror buffs, about how similar that can be, where sometimes people are just predisposed to be thrill seekers. And so this is one of those ways, there are children who love roller coasters and there are children who do not. And we kind of don't, when we look at that, we don't look at it in the same lens as children who like to be scared, but that essentially is what it is. It's people who are looking for thrills, who are looking to push the limits of their experience within a socially acceptable way, or even in a non-socially acceptable way, and kind of push that boundary. And that's normal for children. But I think I also really liked the idea of one horror writer in this article talked about how his own children love horror and how he really found that beautiful, because yes, they're seeing these, even in slasher or violent films, they weren't glorifying violence, but really talking about, I really liked how he put this, but you don't want cruelty to be lauded, but you want them to learn instead that if you're vigilant, if you fight, if you stand up for your crew, then you can make it through whatever this ordeal might be. And I do really, I think I know as a kid, I love just the idea of if you're smart, if you're calm, if you ask for help immediately, you're much more likely to get through a situation. And I think that felt good for a really anxious child. That felt really nice. Even in one of my favorite childhood movies, Spirited Away, that could be really scary for some kiddos. And I loved it because I loved this worrywart who I really identified with, even with her kind of being whiny. I really identified with that. But her being this is wrong, this is bad, we have to leave, we can't be here. And then the scary scene where her parents turn into pigs and she's like, oh no, and now she's in a ghost world. But that was such an exciting adventure. And I think if I hadn't, with a lot of films that I loved as a kid, they have some scary. And right at the start, it's really scary. but that kind of opens up your eyes and your imagination to see something more fantastical that you could really enjoy. And then it has like a really wonderful resolution, which is usually that, the child protagonist makes it through and has also had these wonderful experiences and a lot braver and stronger because of it. And yeah, I just really loved the idea of and it all starts with those children's storybooks where we're just like a little bit scared before bed and then it's okay. And I just thought that was a really wonderful sentiment.
Hannah, I really appreciate all those great points. And it's actually, we've talked about Spirited Away, and I've never seen Spirited Away. And I think that sometimes as a parent, I can be hesitant to show a child something that I haven't seen already. So I think that's just really interesting something to explore is maybe watching it before your child to kind of start thinking about what might come up and what might be scary for them. But as we said earlier, it can completely surprise somebody of what is scary and what isn't scary to a child. And each child is so different. And so it's just really interesting, at the end of the day, just really knowing your child. And if they enjoy being scared and they like that, just,
embrace it.
Embrace it. Have some
Go on a haunted hayride together. There are a lot of, one person said if your child maybe wants to be tantalized but not scared to watch Casper. And I was like, you mean the most emotionally traumatic Halloween film where Casper could have come back to life and he chose to sacrifice himself? Spoilers. But honestly,
loves that movie.
it's a great film, but it's also deeply traumatic. So I don't know. I mean, you'll see which article I'm talking about in the show notes, but I was like, Hocus Pocus, also sad and scary and fun.
But Hocus Pocus terrifies my child because he just we couldn't get past the first little bit because of the emotional piece of it. The emotional piece of him just worried about these children and just doesn't, it's not necessarily scary as more of it just breaks his heart, and he's just a very emotional child. So I think that is, such a good point too of, you just never know how a child's going to react, but
cry. I would, as a little kid, cry. I watched that movie constantly.
Yeah.
But I would cry when the father shooed away the cat at the very beginning. And then you just have to
right.
It's kiddo, we got to get through this for some excitement. And I was like, I'm ready for it. So we're all on our own journeys. And I think that we become brave in a lot of different ways. And
it does make me feel good that I think Ben my son is going to be less scared of things than I am. I think that he is going to feel much more comfortable watching scary stuff, reading scary stuff, and being being less scared. And I think that as a parent, that's really exciting to me because scary movies are really good. And, being scared, he loves Halloween. And so I just, it makes me happy that I'm breaking that generational curse.
Well, I love that. I think, we can take one message out of here. It's listen to your kiddo and really trust them and their experience and support them through what can be maybe scary, can also be really beneficial. It can be helpful, and it can be a place for them to maybe play with some scary feelings before they have to in the real world in a safe way where you can also control it and adapt. So it's cool. We're into being a little bit spooked. We hope that, this doesn't, if you're like our family and this is only the beginning of, we're very into the Victorian tradition of haunted, ghost stories all the way through the holidays to the new year. So if you're similar, start rolling off the carpet, get those spooky stories ready and see if somebody might enjoy it a little bit. But do we want to dive into some fun facts?
Yeah. You want to start?
Oh, gosh. So I think this month for fun facts, we were thinking one thing that scared you that might be a little surprising as a child, right?
Yeah.
So my fun fact would be I once received a canned wombat from a family friend. And he opened up the can and showed me the face of the wombat and said, now you got to eat it. And I lost it and started screaming. I barricaded myself in the bathroom and I was like, I will not eat that wombat. Finally, after some very patient talking through a bathroom door, it was a joke. And I ended up with the coolest show and tell that I showed every single year and be like, this is from an Australian airport. And it's a wombat that's a stuffed animal in a can. And I still have that stuffed animal in a can.
love that.
And it's 27 years later.
Oh,
That's like really harsh.
oh, yeah. Yep.
I feel like that's pretty rough. How about you?
I don't like that math when I realize. So my I was scared a lot as a child, but when I think about media and when I was really scared was the Disney Channel original movie Don't Look Under the Bed. I was a DCOM kid, so I watched all the Disney Channel original movies, and in Don't Look Under the Bed, it's about this girl's imaginary friend that ends up turning into the boogeyman. And it's really scary. Even now, the makeup's really scary. I will let my child watch a lot of stuff. I don't know if I'm going to let him watch this movie. Maybe. We'll see. Nothing wrong with it, but it terrified me. It really scared. And I had an imaginary friend, and I was convinced that this was going to happen. It just sometimes unexpected things do scare you, because there was other scary movies on Disney Channel that didn't get to me, but I think it was just the makeup and the visual part of it, not necessarily like what actually happened. I think it was more it was scary visuals.
It was the makeup on that film
was really good for the time.
Like I was even saying, I was like, because I think Little Monsters aesthetically, if you're looking at it, might be it's 80s and it's a little bit more like creepy. Mm-hmm. But like I did not get scared of Little Monsters.
Yeah.
In the way that Don't Look Under the Bed. Like that, like you mentioned it and I was like, I don't know that movie. There is that really creepy one where the imaginary friend turns into the boogeyman. And then like pulled up the poster and you were like, you mean this movie? And I was like, yeah, that scene where his nails come out and he's like,
and his eyes.
And his eyes turn yellow.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
It's really
and
scary.
then he turns from her best friend to this person
to the person she like loves the most.
Yeah.
Into like spooky, scary times.
Yeah. And he's like so mean to her. And yeah, so it was really scary as a child. Yeah. And I'm curious though if children now would think it was scary. I feel like looking back, a lot of the stuff felt so realistic, and now the quality compared to what they have now is probably probably nothing.
Yeah, I don't know if the York haunted house holds up now. And that bloody handprint next to the glass case that had the gorilla that goes. Oh, I was like, this place is on another level. Awesome.
So that was a great episode. I hope that you enjoyed and learned some new stuff and some things to take away. And I hope you have a wonderful Halloween.
Yes. Enjoy it with your loved ones. Find safe, spooky things to celebrate together. And yeah, enjoy this changing of the seasons. Wonderful. Thanks. Bye.